here in just a little bit. But ACC Media Days. Commissioner Jim Phillips, of course, with the opening comments. Also hear from the bad boys, Florida State, Georgia Tech, and then the newcomers in SMU. That's the plan for today. Here is what Commissioner Jim Phillips had to say today on the main stage, opening up the conference's 4-day media days. One of the top 3 conferences. That's something that Brett Yormark said in Vegas. In generating revenue in college sports, we fully expect that will remain in the years to come. He also said, we will fight to protect the ACC and our members as long as it takes. We are confident in this league and remain a premier conference in college athletics. These disputes continue, talking about Clemson, Florida State, others, to be damaging and disruptive to the league. This conference is bigger than any one school or schools.
Well, I guess we'll see that. I mean, it stands to be true that it should be, but Jim Phillips is walking the tightrope of, well, we'll see if it is or not. And the thing is that Jim Phillips and the other schools, unfortunately, don't get to just say that. And I'm saying this because on this side of the argument, I'm with them, but there are powers that be that might say, no, you're not, and then it'll just be done with it. But the ACC finds itself in a really precarious and interesting position, and you know they need to really be working on right now what the plan is if when they do get out and solidifying what it's going to be. The problem is that there's a bunch of schools that won't tell them what they plan to do once Clemson and Florida State are free of the league.
Yeah, there's also the problem of you don't know when Florida State and Clemson are leaving. There's that whole to-do. Like, if it's in 5 years, then what does it matter about having a plan right this very moment? If it's next month, then, that's something that you need to be pivoting and working towards. So where are we in that? Can somebody answer that? I know there's a bunch of people on Twitter that say, like, it's coming tomorrow or the 15th of August or whatever.
Here's a comment. This is from Pete Thamel. This was actually earlier in the day. Told by multiple sources there's no expectation for Florida State or Clemson to notify the conference they intend to leave by August 15th. That's the deadline to depart if they're not going to be a part of the league next year.
Well, and that confirms what Michael Alford said to Dennis Dodd back in June, that this year was not the year they were going to do that. So if it's coming, it's not coming until 2025 at the earliest.
Right. So he doesn't have to have something ready to go right now. Now, if there were to be some settlement, then that upends the timetable somewhat, hastens it. If there's something unforeseen, sure, but it sure doesn't appear to be the case that they're going to be announcing something in the next 3 weeks. I thought they were supposed to announce something like a week or so ago. That just came and went. Now, then it was August 15th. That looks like it's just going to come and go. So they're going to be in the ACC through this season and next season.
Yes.
And look, we did that with Texas and Oklahoma. We did that with the West Coast schools, and they had a little bit of a buffer period where you knew they were leaving, but they still had that last time commitment to fill out before they bolted. This is not apples to apples in that case, but there is a little bit of a countdown they can at least start of, like, all right, we know that there's at least a couple of years remaining. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
Including this one?
With Texas OU, we knew even when Brent Zerneman broke the story that there was going to be a couple of years. And remember, there could have been even another one. But the Big 12 and Texas OU decided to not settle, but let's negotiate this out. You get out, we bring in, and we all move on.
So there's precedent for there being schools on their way out officially and still being able to cohabitate for a little while. And that sounds like what is going to have to happen here with the ACC is just what I'm getting at, because this is not going to be a situation where it looks like come 3 weeks from now, they're like, all right, that's it. We're headed out, baby, and here's the countdown, and this is our last year or our next to last year. Now, maybe that comes later on, and likely it will, but if you were hoping for a huge explosion today, I don't think you got that in terms of like actual, this is breaking and this is how it's going to break. But, man, you sure did, though, even though you didn't get that, saw all the little cracks, and you saw all the little warts, and you saw all the disruption, and you saw that, man, this looks a lot like the Pack last year. And we don't even know because one is barking so loud. There's another that's next to them, and it's just it's there for support and is just not as loud in Clemson. And then there's a bunch of schools you don't really have an idea of what's going on in their minds. You think you know, but you really don't. And you assume you know, but you really don't, because they all have different potential landing pads, whether it's North Carolina or it's North Carolina State and any other school you want to mention. So, yeah, today the takeaway is that it doesn't seem like anything's on the precipice of happening as far as a gigantic move, but man, there is going to be that at some point in time, and it's just a matter of if, or a matter of when, not if.
Doesn't this, though, seem a hell of a lot healthier than the Pac-12 a year or two ago?
Well, only because they have the like the power of attorney to not flip off the machine.
Yeah.
That's the grant of rights until 2036. If not for that 2036 day, this would be way more chaotic. And Jim Phillips...
But it's there.
It's there, yes. It's there. Jim Phillips reiterated that throughout the press conference a couple times. It's like basically saying they signed this agreement.
Phillips said that they, for those trying to exit the league, they twice signed an extension with the agreement to 2036.
Now, of course, there's not... the guarantee of it would be all the way to 2036.
Sure.
There's the ESPN clause coming up at the beginning of next year that could change and turn this all on its head as well. I'm sure that'll be another just wait for that. Actually is something that you probably now do have to wait for, and not something that's like happening right this very second, like the last month has been filled with. But yeah, I think today, just generalizing what I heard from Jim Phillips was he's a man who's clearly on defense. I think they're clearly a little concerned about where this is headed, just in terms of what they're having to do to try to protect themselves, and also what could still be to come if that contract does not prove ironclad. And I think it's just totally obvious that this is a conference that is not going to look the exact same on the other side of this thing. And I just don't know what the other side of when you turn that page, if it's later on this year or 2036, because all the contractual legal stuff, I don't pretend to know all of that stuff.
Let's say it's 2027. Okay, it's still a long way.
It's still a long ways away, but what we're walking into is a very contentious and very just unhealthy conference foundation and layout right now. I think that's what's clearer than anything else.
What I think Florida State and Clemson are angling for, ideally, is an exit point around the time that they look into the college football playoff deal.
Right.
Because if that happens in the next couple years, if they are able to exit then and they have the look in on the deal and they know what the playoff is and where they're not going to make more money, where they can make more money, where that's going to change, then that's going to reset the market again. It is interesting to me, and I would have to talk to somebody who understood this, about Florida State and Clemson twice signed that agreement. Their argument, and this is where I get stuck, because it's not intellectually dishonest or anything, but their point is a whole lot of things have changed since we agreed to that, and now we're stuck in this antiquated thing, and we feel like we're falling behind, and we don't want to fall behind, so we're going to do what we can to get out. Now, their methods, absolutely questionable. But I also don't know if there's any kind of legal precedent to be like, well, the landscape has fully changed and they're allowed, they've got freedom to go do something else because they signed a deal that's now arcane by measure. And I also say this, it was really stupid of them all to sign that in the first place.
Well, but at the time,
even at the time, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
All right, well, Jim Phillips is defending Swofford.
He'll say at the time. Here's the thing. Okay, if the SEC wasn't doing it at the time and the Big Ten wasn't doing it at the time of signing something to 2036, why in the world would you?
I don't remember
if you
exactly.
are as good as you are, like you said.
I do think that there was a reason for it. I can't remember what it was.
Because Florida State and Clemson were talking to the Big 12 then.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's still so many different routes this could go down. I mean, there's only a few that we're clear on, is like, hey, a settlement of some sort, a clause kicking in or not kicking in via ESPN here in a few months, waiting all the way out to 2036. I don't know where eventually that goes, but I do know this, that it's very contentious, and we're only really hearing from one of the schools, really. I mean, we're just hearing Florida State. Nobody else is really barking. Others are saying stuff like little things here and there, but they're not rattling the cage. Florida State is, and to Florida State's credit, although I think they've kind of gone overboard in some cases because it does become petulant little children, is if they didn't do that, would we be talking about this? Would the heat be turned up as much as it is on Jim Phillips in the conference if Florida State wasn't so loud about
If they were Clemson right now, like Clemson is, I had somebody I spoke with, our buddy Rick. I got to know him about a year ago. He's very tied into the ACC. He's a sponsor, very highly up the ladder, not in the administration. Spoke with him a little bit on Friday, and he said that Clemson has positioned themselves in a way that they don't look bad.
Right.
That they could actually at any time go, you know what? Because even though they're really, really, really good in football and they're okay in everything else, some other things, they could easily just step away from this thing and say, no, we're a part of this conference. We're moving forward with them. And then what would that mean for Florida State? Like they would be on an island. They would still want to leave. Yeah. But Clemson kind of, in a way, looks like they're not really combative here.
So, and I read a lot today. David Hale, maybe as far as like an overall conference writer at ESPN that they have, maybe the best one when it comes to covering the ACC because he just understands every school so well. But he wrote kind of a history of the grant of rights and what it was and kind of what the legal cases are. Florida State is trying to argue within its own state laws, and I'm sure they're probably stealing a little bit from Clemson and vice versa, that they should be allowed to do what they want because there are provisions inside the grant of rights that should allow them to do that. Clemson's argument is very simple. It says the grant of rights says that you own the home games and that the ESPN contract in that says that as long as there's 15 teams in the league, the money's going to stay the same. So Clemson is saying if we leave, technically nothing changes, so we shouldn't really owe you anything. Because we can leave and go and take our rights somewhere. You won't own our home games anymore. We'll sell those, and we'll make an agreement with somebody else, and then you can go sign somebody else to take our place, and then you still have that same inventory. So in that argument, it's very simple, but the devil's in the details because the ACC is like, the hell you don't owe us any money. No, it's way different.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've definitely taken a different approach, and they've positioned themselves differently, and they've been a lot more professional about it, I guess you could say. And so I think that if somehow or another they were forced to stay in this arrangement, they would be able to get along just fine, whereas I think with Florida State, it would be a lot more difficult to do that. You're still not going to let them out of their room if you have control over that, but they're going to be kicking, screaming, and yelling the entire time that they're under your roof. And I think that much is clear at this point. And I don't blame Florida State entirely, but they definitely are the ones falling on the sword as far as taking the brunt of public criticism for how this has unfolded. But, yeah, it's a bit of a mess. I'm not going to be one of those folks that is like, it's falling apart. Get ready. Here comes the Noles of the Big 12. I'm not in that camp, but I do think today just reinforced the idea of like, man, this just seems like really rocky territory for the ACC. And I don't know how ironclad that contract is. And if they somehow are able to force this arrangement for another decade, then my God, I don't know what that looks like. But that would be fascinating. And at the same time, if they're unable to do so because the courts rule differently, then I think it's easy to see how this could all come crumbling down pretty quickly. And I know that there's very passionate ACC fans who become anti-Big 12 fans. There's like this Pitt guy who's just, I see him constantly, and I don't follow him, but I see him, and he's constantly beating down any Big 12 rumor and things, and he's getting very frustrated over the fact that people think the ACC won't survive. And so maybe it does, but it's just hard to imagine a scenario where they survive long-term and it has anything to do with Florida State or Clemson in particular and possibly others.
You said that Florida State has fallen on the sword for everybody else, right?
Yeah.
I think they threw themselves on the sword.
Oh, yeah. I mean, whatever. Same, tomato.
Listen, they're not dipping the toe in the fire.
They have to protect themselves, but at the same time, you wonder if they could have taken the Clemson approach here. They've been very outspoken.
See, I don't think so because I think had they not, like I just said a second ago, if they don't do that the way that they've done it, I mean, clearly, like they could probably pull back the reins a little bit in some cases. But then again, that's like some of their fan base. You can't really dictate how the fan base reacts passionately or not. So a lot of what we're even referring to is fan base related, really. But had they not made as much noise, then has everybody spent in the past 2 weeks talking about nothing but the ACC dissolution? And I've seen that nationally. I've seen that social media-wise constantly for the last 2 weeks. It's made a lot of noise. Whether that means anything or not in the long run, the courts are going to decide that, not Twitter. But it has created this sort of this PR look for the ACC where everybody is assuming death and the dissolution, and everybody's already, dream or wish casting where their team is going to end up, not in the ACC in the long run. So it's created this environment where all this speculation is occurring and seems to have some validity behind it, because there is now a growing belief of well, dang, I think they really are in trouble. And if this doesn't go their way, then I think this thing, and so that loudness by Florida State has created that firestorm.
I think the ACC is fine. I don't think it's the Pac-12 and anywhere close to that.
I'm not speaking for myself.
And Florida State, usually there's always one that's a little more outspoken than others. But here's from Pluto 2363 in the chat room. Thank you all for being a part of today's show. Also, if you haven't already off the top, we'd appreciate you hit the like button and also subscribe if you have not. My biggest issue with FSU or Clemson to the SEC, ESPN owns both. They pay less for FSU Clemson in the ACC. Why would they ever agree to move those two to the SEC and pay them more? Makes no sense.
The only reason it would make sense is if they're tired of paying the other schools that they don't like. Like if ESPN's like, damn, we got to get a lot of money to Boston College and Georgia Tech, and we hate that, which I don't think is true.
Yeah.
That's the only way it works out. And I'll say this kind of dovetails nicely into something that was brought up today at ACC Media Days, which I know we'll talk about at length. But part of the identity crisis they're having is that the SEC has a TV network that has shills all over it talking about how great the ACC is. They have Paul Feinbaum, who is willing to cup the balls of every SEC team that's there, no matter what.
You said cup, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And
Peter
the
Burns.
The ACC has really good shows on it. They're well produced. They've got good analysts on game day. But can you tell me who the ACC's Paul Feinbaum is?
I don't know. I don't even watch him, so I wouldn't know.
But you do know who he is, even if you know who he is.
I know of him. Yes,
exactly.
I know
who he is.
Yes.
Everybody in college football knows who Paul Feinbaum is. The ACC is saying, and look, it's not good that shills exist anyway, but the ACC is like, well, how come ESPN didn't give us a shill? Like, how come they're not promoting us as much as they are? The network's owned by the same company. It's like we're less important to them, and I think they have some validity in that argument, even though the SEC has been more successful overall.
But we all know that, for example, with the Caton Clark effect, that ESPN is now promoting WNBA basketball more than ever, along with Angel Reese and others. It's their network, and it's their programming. Mm-hmm. They pick and choose what they're going to promote more than others. They used to promote the WNBA, but it was there, right? It was there. Now these numbers are coming back, and so they're promoting the games and putting more games on than ever before, and the SEC gives them that when it comes to college football.
Yeah, it does, and I know you're probably going to roll around to that quote at some point in time, or are we going to dive into it right now about the SEC network part of it? Because I got my thoughts just on ESPN in general and like the whole agreement with the contract and, you know, the promotion or lack thereof and all that is I just don't know because I'm not a lawyer. So these are just things that non-lawyers like me or non-hardcore like diving into the grant of rights agreements and all that. Like I like realignment to some extent. I don't like to get into the actual dirt of it necessarily, like on contractual stuff like that. I just wonder how ESPN could spitting in the face of like 10 schools and saying, we're taking away your TV contract. I just don't know how that would work. Like, you're just going to tell Boston College and Pitt and Syracuse and like markets that apparently matter too. I know there's a whole conversation about market importance and all that, but so can they just freely just basically say, like, we're discarding you guys? Oh, yeah, we're probably going to want some of your basketball games down the line, and we'll still want to talk about you. But can you just cut them off like that and there not be an issue of some sort? Like, that's just something I've wondered about when the whole conversation about, well, ESPN will just take the schools they want, put them where they want. and then wash their hands of everybody else. Is like, can they legally do that? Like, is there not some sort of a backlash if you were to just drop 10 schools on their heads and walk away from that agreement that wouldn't have some long, lasting effects when it comes to just the business in general and trust and things like? I don't know. That's the part I wonder about as much as anything else.
Yeah, I don't know about all that, but you could just say you're done. I mean, that's what happened to Pac-12 teams, right? But they found, like Oregon State, Washington State, they're the ones that were left by themselves.
But their contract came up and their schools split
there's
legally.
A difference. The ACC's 2036.
This would be the ESPN itself saying, we're going to take your best teams, put them on our other brands, and the rest of y'all can take peanuts or just find another home. And that to me just seems like it would be problematic.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe you could just do that and turn all those teams away from this agreement, and they just have to swallow it and take it, and there's no hard feelings. But I don't know. I feel like it'd be a bit more disruptive than just, the clean, we'll take you too, and you're going to go to our SEC brand, and then we'll walk off and go in our new direction. I think it'll be a bit messier.
If ESPN sees a reason to promote something more than others or show something more than others because of financial reasons, they'll do it. And so if the ACC gives them that, they'll figure it out. They'll figure it out.
And I think my question is, and look, the WNBA has been having this argument a lot louder than the ACC for way longer about, hey, we're on your network. Would you talk about us just a little bit? Aside from when something weird happens, like, it's not even like, yes, you're going to push what's hot and you're going to follow the trends. I think that ESPN as a whole sometimes doesn't promote everything they've got to their own detriment.
No, but it's their network.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just saying, if I was in charge, I would be like, okay, we've got these properties that look, the WNBA is on prime time in the middle of the week. I'm like, even before Caitlin Clark was even a thought, I would maybe push it a little bit more. I'm not going to shove it down people's throats, but I would push it a little bit more. Look, we're paying a lot for this ACC network.
They're going to promote the NFL, NBA, and college football.
Yeah, but my point is, if you have financial interest in all these things, you should create maybe not equal effort, but
you don't have equal financial interest in all these things.
Yeah, but they still have financial interest.
Here's what I know. I don't watch Paul Feinbaum. I know who he is. I know he's been covering college football forever, and I know that he's very much entrenched in the SEC. So the ACC, someone rise to the occasion, somebody raised their hand and say, hey, we want to do a national show. I think, do a hell of a job covering the Big 12 or Baylor and everybody else, right? So I don't understand why ACC network is a thing, right, Craig? It's a thing. Just because they don't have strong enough personalities, is that ESPN's fault?
I don't know. I wasn't really speaking to the Feinbaum thing a second ago. I was speaking in general about the idea.
I know what you were speaking of. I was bringing that up as part of our discussion.
If we're going to talk about the Feinbaum thing, that's up to somebody that's anchoring the ACC network to have stepped up and been interesting enough to have their own platform. Yeah. And clearly ESPN doesn't feel like there's anybody that's done that, or clearly there's not anybody that's attempted to do that. Feinbaum, to his credit, has created the audience. He has the diehards. Now, if Jim in Raleigh and Betty Sue in Atlanta and Phil and Pitt don't want to call in and be like Dale in Tuscaloosa every day, well, there's just not the same audience or the same passion. And let's face it, the SEC is different. It does, as stupid as the tagline is, it does mean more. So maybe there's not that audience to have a Feinbaum, but Jim Phillips was talking about just promotion and in some cases propaganda, because that is what Feinbaum can be, and I say that respectfully, but it's true. And so they want more pro-ACC stuff. I don't blame them for that, but I couldn't begin to tell you the reasons as to why that's not happening, probably mostly because there's not a personality or an audience that would be similar to what the ACC or the SEC and Paul Feinbaum have carved out.
Who owned the Pac-12 network?
The Pac-12 did.
They did not have any connections to Fox or ESPN or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That was on their own.
Yeah.
I would think that's very difficult to do. The ACC is still one hell of a conference. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that gets lost in all this is Florida State, they want to get out. Clemson perhaps want to get out. Maybe others want to get out. Craig, you brought up the fact, can they just can ESPN just disappear in Boston College and Pittsburgh and Georgia Tech are all by themselves? how many of those schools would land? It would create unbelievable speculation.
There's just this one scenario that I see pop up that I'm questioning because I don't know, because like I said, I'm not a lawyer, and it's the situation where that big bad villain ESPN says Clemson and Florida State, you're going to the SEC, which they might go to the Big Ten for all we know. They might not go anywhere for another 10 years. Like, that's the thing. We're not promising or predicting anything. We're just talking about this. But I just don't, like, just lawyers tell me, is it just legal to just take your two prizes and to put them on your other network that you also own and then tell everybody to kick rocks? Like, that's the part that without any sort of, like, collateral damage down the line of, like, you just say, screw you, Syracuse, Pittsburgh, Louisville, everybody. Now, I'm sure some of them would find homes, and you'd help them find homes in some cases, Louisville probably to the Big 12, which you also have an incentive in. But that just seems like bad business to, like, crater an entire conference.
That's where that February decision comes into play where, look, Jim Phillips can say, well, Florida State and Clemson signed this deal. Well, he can't get mad at ESPN if the deal that they signed with ESPN and ESPN does that. Because all this is going on, ESPN's not going to tip their hand in that at all until they do, because if they do, then it's going to make it look like they do have these, evil puppet master plans. But, Craig, I want to compliment you. I'm thinking about it differently on Feinbaum because ESPN didn't create Feinbaum. They went and got him. Yep. Feinbaum curated his whole crazy audience. So in a way, the SEC is just lucky that Feinbaum exists and is there to lap up whatever they throw at him. And he's done that and built a career out of it and written books and had this big radio show and TV shows and all of that. But nobody in any other conference. It's not just the ACC. The Pac-12 didn't have one. The Big 12's never had one, especially not one that is so aggrandizing to the league like Feinbaum is, that our league is better, everybody else sucks, and don't bother me. His kind of attitude towards it. So, the SEC is just kind of lucky that Feinbaum existed in the first place.
Well, they had to be smart enough to hire him, even if a lot of people watch him or not.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this was a banner at the ACC Media Days that was put up earlier in the day. Toughest non-conference schedule in the country. I've never seen that used. Now, I love non-conference games, the good ones, like Michigan, Texas, etc. Right? I don't understand. That's a big banner. That cost about $1,000 to make that banner right there, maybe more. Have you ever seen that?
And you may only be able to use it once too. That's the other thing. Once that thing's done, it's going to be in some intern's garage.
They have a non-conference schedule. That's great, but I've never seen it promoted like that.
No, and look, it is everybody. Well, the thing is, everybody, for the most part, in the ACC has an SEC rival that they play most every year, and then you've got some really, really just good cross-conference games, no matter what. But also, it's a weird flex because you go, well, what about your conference? How tough is that schedule?
No.
Like, when you're done with those games, which are the minority of your games, are the majority of your games tough or not? And therein lies this is Dan Beebe era Big 12 stuff right there.
Yeah, I think that's, I guess what the group that helped organize Media Days and its promotion and its signage and all those things came up with as the best way to promote the brand is to highlight their tough non-conference schedules. I don't think I've ever seen anybody highlight that in particular. An individual team, sure, but the conference itself, no. And it's kind of weird when that means that half the equation of that is non-ACC schools are what you're also promoting, because that's why it's the toughest non-conference schedules, because you're playing teams that aren't ACC schools. So, I don't know how well thought out that was. I don't know what the ACC was preparing for in terms of focus on them starting today, and whether or not it's a bit more than maybe you thought it was going to be about a month ago, just because of what all the rhetoric has turned into, online and whatnot. But you did have plans and committees and whatnot come together, like, how are we going to pull off Media Days? And at some point, somebody said, like, I think we should highlight the toughest non-conference schedule in the country. And I don't know, maybe there's some people out there that think that was a great thing to highlight, but I'm sure a lot of people had their fun with that yesterday because it is kind of wonky and not something you typically see talked about very much, and not the strongest of statements either, especially when people are looking at you to make nothing but strong statements over the next couple of days. Yeah. So, yeah, that was a little funny, and not sure how else we were supposed to take that, because certainly I don't think anybody was like, man, I can't wait to get on air today and talk about how tough the ACC non-conference schedules are. Instead, it's turned into just a point of being kind of poked at and made fun of. But, hey, if that's true, then highlight it. Use what you got. I mean, if those are the bullets that you got in your gun, then fire them off and make your noise, because the spotlight's on you right now, ACC, and I think Jim Phillips did that earlier today. I think we're really underselling the fact that today basically confirmed that you're getting 2 more years. I know we talked about it, but basically saying
that's how we started the show.
But I'm hammering it again that if there's anything for all this, let's make fun of the non-conference schedule or how shaky the foundation is like, well, the foundation's remaining, it looks like, for at least a couple more years at least. And who the heck knows what all happens in that time frame. But certainly it's interesting times for that league and for Jim Phillips. And I know he had other things that he said as well that he got into, but we'll see. When the season rolls around, I look forward to testing their theory on whether they really had the toughest non-conference schedule or not, because a lot of that's based on where teams were the year prior and so on and so forth. But if they do have that, then flaunt it and go win a bunch of those games and kind of throw it back in the face of everybody who's talking about about all the off-the-field stuff right now.
All right. We were able to chew on that for quite a lot. On Thursday's show, there was somebody in the chat that said, all you guys ever do is talk about Florida State. Florida State also allows us to need to talk about them.
That person is ignorant and doesn't listen to a bulk of the show. You listen to cut-out segments. That's all you listen to, because otherwise you just be a dummy, because clearly that's not true. So, yeah, thanks for the comment, though.
Somebody also today said that has anyone other than Clemson and Virginia Tech ever won the ACC title? Clemson has 8. Florida State has 5. Virginia Tech won 3 early. And then there's let's see, is it Pittsburgh, maybe Boston College, and one other team that's won 1 each. But Clemson and Florida State have won 13 of the national titles since they started playing an ACC championship game. Now, there's other ACC title games, teams that won it back in the 50s, 60s, whenever it began.
Well, since Florida State joined in 91 or 92, Florida State and Clemson have won or shared 30 of those titles. And the only team that's won back-to-back titles is Virginia Tech, and the only teams that have won multiple titles other than that are Virginia Tech, and I want to say Maryland, who is not in the conference.
Well, I just gave the last 20.
Yeah, but even before that, it was, so it was.
Pitt was kind of an outlier a couple of years ago, just out of nowhere. Because other than that, it's been basically Clemson the entire time, and Florida State last year. But Clemson had their dominant little run there for a decade where
they won 8 of 10. They won 5 in a row.
Pretty crazy. Now, are you going to? I know Jim Phillips made other comments. The basketball comment.
No, I don't have that one. No.
Okay, so I saw this. I think it was from Bud Elliott, who's a Florida State guy. And I think one of the things that really bothers ACC folks, would you say, is the lack of promotion. Mm-hmm. We just talked about that, the whole we don't have a fine bomb. Well, that's partly your fault and just partly the region's fault, I guess, that there's not somebody that's like that guy that speaks for the ACC and promotes them at will. But what is also a knock on the ACC when especially we're talking about big football-related stuff?
They care about basketball more.
They care about basketball more, and they care about basketball more, and they care about basketball more no matter what. It's basketball. It's Tobacco Road-driven, which makes the whole UNC thing quite interesting. But, yeah, Jim Phillips came out today and I guess was talking about basketball and strength of basketball, and it was Bud and I think various other people that I saw dude, it is football media days, and everybody is tuning in to hear your comments on football powers in your league who would wreck you if they left potentially, not because of their basketball programs, but because of football and football. And look, if you're a basketball league, like Brett York made a comment, I think probably once or twice, but now thinking back on it, he didn't talk a lot about basketball. No. He talked about football and the future and all those types of things. And I think that's where the ACC kind of has to be like, guys, basketball's great. You're really good. No one's denying that. But that's at risk if you don't take care of the football side of things, because some of those people you're hanging your hat on could be out the door if the door swings open. Your North Carolinas, for example, which would change the whole identity of that conference in a major way. So that was another thing that I saw, was just the time spent talking about basketball. Now, it might have been 45 seconds, but for some people, that was 45 seconds too long at football media days. And that's part of the whole, I think, kind of the disagreements that are happening is some people are looking at this and saying, guys, football, money, football, and they're still, it seems like, content on being Old Tobacco Road and hanging their hat on basketball.
Yeah, I think that's like at the root of like an old problem in the ACC where North Carolina and Duke were so elite at basketball and so great that when it came down to decisions, they were making decisions, well, this is great for basketball, this will be this. Can you imagine this? And then you have schools like Clemson and Florida State who are football-first schools that are like, yeah, but football makes more money. And they're like, yeah, that'll all take care of itself, you know. And they've made the effort since then, but that's like one of those old things, you know, kind of. Every conference has one, and the ACC's was they like basketball more. And you're Jim Phillips, like, bragging about it at football media days. Like, look, man, your basketball's great. And as a matter of fact, if Florida State left the basketball conference alone and stayed in football, the ACC wouldn't care. Like, they'd be like, oh, well, once every 4 years when you're good, we won't lose in Tallahassee. Great. The rest of the time, like, oh, well, that's one less place we got to go.
Yeah.
Rounding this out, just a couple of the other comments. He mentioned that the ESPN deal's not going anywhere. He talked a little bit about basketball, as I mentioned, which was, you know, a brief thing. He talked a bit about the House settlement and just the ongoing legal issues. I don't think we really care, nor do we want to spend time right now diving into any of those things. And he, you know, basically said, you know, that there's obviously some situations ongoing right now, but that they're going to remain together and that they're strong. And I think, you know, for as much as we're talking about all this here, and as much as clearly there's like a disruption going on, I think if you're an ACC fan who wants the league to stay together, you got about as strong a performance from Jim Phillips as you could have expected today. I mean, because what else could he really say? He can't say, like, yeah, screw Florida State.
You know what he did? He did the opposite of Kleofka.
Yes.
He actually had some meat on the bone.
Yes.
Well, he addressed it.
Never really did.
Yeah.
If he did, he actually never really even brought it up. And last year, unfortunately, without trying to bring up somebody that's a dead person basically in college athletics, he just like that. I thought Jim Phillips did everything he possibly could to defend the conference, set some things up, and move on.
Yeah, and for those worried, he said, hey, we're bigger than anyone's school, and, you know, delivered those types of messages. And so for all of the talk that we've had over this first hour, I do think that also needs to be said is, you know what, we all wondered, how is he going to address things at the podium, and how were they going to talk about the issues at hand? And I think he touched on about everything, said what he could say, and could not say some things in some cases, but delivered a message that they're not going anywhere no matter who leaves the conference, and that they're strong no matter who leaves the conference. Now, you can disagree with that, maybe, and a lot of people would, depending on what that combination of schools would look like. But for what he could say, I think he was about as good as he could be given the situation.
All right, so there's a lot. It is ACC Media Days. It's the first. They have their 4 days, too. Last in Vegas, Big 12 had 2. 8 each day. Last week, the SEC had 4, and the ACC with their 4. By the way, Kim Coulter, Super Chat, thank you. As a football brand, which one has the highest value, Clemson or FSU?
I don't look at all those charts and the various measurements and all of that. I was hoping Paul would have that answer offhand.
Well,
I would say it's Florida State.
Himself.
I would say it's Florida State slightly.
Yeah,
but
I don't think it's a big
I would
difference.
say
I think
they're
you're splitting hairs,
I don't think you can split them apart.
It's not like Coke versus Pepsi, where Coke is clearly the more valuable brand, and Pepsi has to spend more on marketing, but they're still valuable.
Which they do, which they buy out every sports arena in America, fill it with Pepsi products. Boo. Although if you want to sponsor us, Wild Cherry is great. I love Wild Cherry Pepsi.
But to me, that's like saying it's Coke or Diet Coke. It's just on your preference, right?
Yeah. So somebody asked about, of the teams remaining in the Big 12, with everybody who's left, right? Mm-hmm. Who has the most Big 12 titles among those who are still a part of the conference?
Baylor.
TCU has 1. Colorado has the 1. TCU, Oklahoma State, Colorado each have 1. Baylor and Kansas State have 3.
Okay. Sorry, K-State. You just got the one 2 years ago that tied that up. Yeah. My bad.
RX, FSU was down in football for a lot of ways up until the last couple of years. Of course, they had the national title. Paul, was at 13 is when they won it?
Yeah.
Clemson has owned the postseason. So, and Clemson has had the run. The last 10 years, right after Florida State's national title, Clemson took off and went to a different level.
2016 was their last 10-win season before 2022. So between 2017 and 2022, they were awful.
Yeah, I would say, I think I don't know if you could. I would say initially because of the Bowden years, Florida State's a bigger football brand. That's a long time ago. That's like bringing up the Osborne years.
Yeah, but those things
let me finish.
Yeah,
Clemson did win it in 1980, but Florida State had an unbelievable parts of the 80s and all of the 90s.
I would say that they've made themselves maybe a little bit ahead because as great as Dabo's been, he's not iconic yet. Not to say that he won't be. He won a couple of national titles. You're sure as hell will be. But, there's very few iconic coaches. It's, Bear Bryant and Osborne and Bowden and guys like that.
Guy who just retired?
Yeah, Saban.
Him?
Yeah, that are icons. And so I think that maybe puts Florida State a little bit ahead as far as recognizability. But, again, Dabo has 2 less national titles than Florida State does and 1 less than Bobby did. So, it's not like he's that far off. He just needs more wins.
Got to make a call while we're live on the